The 3 pale moons of Centaurus were only a rumor here. Helion spoke orbited the bronze whisper of Mars, its skeletal ring rotating slow and dignified. A woman stepped off a shuttle painted the color of embered clay. She was tall for a human, and obviously not human, orange fur brushed by starlight, a long, balanced tail held politely low, vulpine ears pricked beneath a charcoal hood. Her face, though, had been softened by a whisper of holographic blur, not to hide that she was Vulpar, but to erode the hard edges that might proclaim her rank. Her transit documents called her Lyra Vale, third-tier logistics attaché for the Vulpar sovereignty, not Empress Ardent Aurelia Varan of the Astral Court. No entourage. No silver-draped counselors. No glimmering diadem of command. Just a small satchel, a clipped badge, and a manner learned in weeks of study aboard the quiet courier that ferried her from Variax to Mars orbit. She moved through Helion Spoke's customs with the unremarkable grace of bureaucrats everywhere, tail a measured metronome, ears turning minutely at the station's many dialects, the tin bell of Jovian trade cant, the soft scroll of Martian dust speak, the thick vowels of Pacific Earth. The attaché quarters they'd assigned her were tasteful and hermetic. She set her satchel down, looked once at the bed, and knew she would not sleep here much. The Astral Court had warned her, reports of exploitation. Misallocated grants. Humans and minor species treated as expendables. The throne sees what courtiers permit. If you want truth, leave your crown. Lyra dimmed the lights until the room's edges dissolved. She breathed in, letting the familiar scent glyphs of home fade from her memory, replacing them with Helion's mix of antiseptic lemon, metal heat, the faint green of recycled air. The Vulparian script sewn inside her cloak read, "Walk unseen. Listen more than speak." Change begins with a question. She keyed her door, stepped back into Helion's arteries, and went looking for the questions. Helion Spoke had 2 faces. The first, a polished crescent, diplomat lounges and quiet fountains, gravity tuned to the comfort of those with budgets. The second, the spine, a honeycomb of conduits and ribs where the station's heartbeat echoed through floor grates. Lyra slipped into the spine by following a freight lift down and pretending not to notice the sign that said authorized crew only. She kept her posture deferential and moved like she belonged. In the spine, color drained from the world, light went practical, shadows honest. The smell of machine oil sharpened to a point. Distant, Helion's spin made the deck hum like a music note just below hearing. She heard the failing light before she saw it, an old flashlight coughing photons in a sputter rhythm, a stubborn star that refused extinction. Around it, a Kratos desk, a chair whose foam had remembered better years, a salvaged panel propped against bulkhead to turn the corner into a nook. A human sat there, deep in the tense, unblinking love that exists between a mind and a problem. He wore Helion maintenance blue, sleeves pushed to the elbow, skin cross-hatched with small scars accrued the way cities accrue history, quietly, constantly. His name tag said J.R.H.E. Lyra stopped one tail length away. "Your star is dying," she said in standard, voice softened to the human register. The man startled as if yanked by a filament. The flashlight rolled and clinked. "Sorry, ma'am." Then, seeing the ears, the tail, he corrected, awkward but earnest. "Honored. Vulpar." "I questioned the star," Lyra said, smiling. "Not its observer." He glanced down, smacked the light against his palm once. It brightened, then sulked. "It just needs convincing." He nudged a thick manual closer to the glow. The cover read, "Field Dynamics in Quantum Lattice Drives, 7th ed." "Ambitious," Lyra said. "Most attaches prefer budgets to field tensors. Most maintenance techs prefer sleep," he countered, a weary humor to it. "I'm Jonah Reed. I keep Helion breathing, circulation loops, O2 gardens, thermostacks. On breaks, I try to learn things I can't afford to study." Lyra felt the tug of recognition, not of him, but of the shape of him, a mind unwilling to accept the altitude of its birth as the ceiling of its flight. "Lyra Vale," she said, using the name that would not tilt rooms. "Logistics. On paper." They stood in the cheap light, strangers with a common hunger. She took from her pocket a small sphere, Vulpine field lamp, warmth-hued, powered by ambient heat differentials. She thumbed it alive, and the nook became an island of steady day. Jonah blinked. That'd cost me a month of shifts. It costs me a pocket, Lyra answered, setting it between them. Let it pay us both. The lamp revealed a mathematics that didn't posture. Jonah's notes were tidy, decisions justified in the margins with small arrows and single words. Why, trade-off, no. He wasn't following a recipe. He was tasting the dish as he cooked. You're folding intake flow before the lattice staging, Lyra murmured, tail lifting with interest. Helion's secondary drive is old. You're trying to make it younger without asking it to be anyone else. Less waste heat, Jonah said, tapping a diagram. Means less burn on the coolant loop means fewer midnight alarms. Also cuts propellant costs. Helion pretends not to notice. Administration loves savings they can attribute to their strategic oversight. His mouth tilted. I call it fewer fires. Have you submitted this? Lyra asked. Maintenance doesn't submit to engineering, he said matter-of-factly. We submit to timesheets. If I staple math to a requisition, it gets stripped like insulation and tossed. The accuracy of the cynicism scraped something raw in her. The Astral Court's reports had spoken in the distant grammar of policy. Jonah's words placed a hand on the leak. Then we'll route around the blockage, Lyra said. We? I'm very good at pushing crates, she said lightly. And I know how to staple so a thing won't be easily stripped. Jonah studied her. The human eye is poor at reading Vulpine expressions, but he sensed the intent in the way her ears angled, in the steadiness of her breath. You're not like the other attaches I've met. I'm not like the other attaches I've met, she agreed. They worked until station midnight rounded into station morning. Lyra watched him take apart one assumption at a time, clean the burrs, put the thing back gentler and truer. When the alarm on his wrist chirped end of break, he rubbed his eyes, made a face at the lamp like they were old friends, and said, I'll be back here tonight. Not because I have to. Because I don't know how not to. I have meetings I'm supposed to endure, Lyra said. I'll aspire to be late. 3 nights make a habit. 5 make a pattern. By the 7th, the spine had noticed. He came with a clipboard and eyes that weighed, a foreman named Bitsakin who'd been on Helion long enough to remember when the seals sang off-key. He leaned at the mouth of the nook and said, very friendly, Busy bees. RB from the Sovereignty and RB from the Ducks. We're off-shift, Jonah said carefully. Off-shift bees still make honey, Bitsakin said. His gaze flicked to Lyra's badge, hovered on the lamp, slid to the manual like a knife past ribs. Rumor flies faster than vac leaks. Rumor says maintenance reads passing diagrams to the fancy tales. Lyra felt her ears stiffen, deliberately smoothed them. Rumor is bored, she said. Give it a wrench, and it will tighten the wrong bolt. Rumor has a form, Bitsakin said, tapping his slate. Securities form. Standard. Unusual contact with foreign attaché. Potential information transfer. You know how it is. Jonah didn't flinch, which told Lyra this wasn't his first dance with forms that don't know the music. I know that form, he said. It gets pulled when something's working that isn't supposed to, because it wasn't authorized to. Bitsakin's smile didn't reach the eyes. I just sign where they draw the lines. You too, spread it out. Not so cozy. Makes the station nervous. He walked away like a man who'd done his job to the letter. Helion's a rumor engine, Jonah said softly. Every system that hums has a story about why it shouldn't. Lyra turned the lamp down a fraction. We proceed, she said. But we change our path. Maintenance changed for me, Jonah said, mouth tight. Hull inspection starting tomorrow. It's the job they give you when they want you visible and expendable. Who signed that assignment? Admin stamp, he said. No name. Rumor's handwriting. Lyra nodded once. She had come to Helion to listen. But listening, she was learning, is not always a stillness. Sometimes it is a footfall that places itself where a foot is not invited. Outside the station, space poured in all directions like a quiet ocean with no shore. Jonah's suit fed him the hiss of his own air, the cheek-itching feel of the helmet ring. He walked the hull with a tether humming at his waist. Beneath his boots, Helian's skin was scarred, micro-impacts polished by time, seam welds older than some of the flags in the diplomat dome. How's that panel?" came the voice of a controller who had never forgiven the station for not being a planet. "Panel's honest," Jonah said. "Gaskets lying. Replacing. Copy." No one said watch for accidents, but the silence set it on repeat. He was 3 panels past the inspection mark when the tether tugged wrong, once, sharply. He twisted and saw the reel jammed, a snagged loop biting the drum. The outward vector pulled just enough to be a promise. Another centimeter and the tether would cut, and he would be a slow stone skimming into nothing, talking calmly to a channel that would go very brave and very quiet at once. "Control," Jonah said, careful with his words. "I have a jammed tether and outward drift. Requesting. Hold position. Do not." The voice dissolved into static. Not the bad kind, the worst kind. A human voice switching to protocol because fear is an unsanctioned frequency. Above him, a service lock cracked and spilled a small, dark shape into the light. It came along the hull like a cat, 4 magnet pads, small thrusters purring. A Vulpine auxiliary suit, sleeker, built for tails. Lyra's faceplate touched gold as the sun found her. She snapped to Jonah's frame with a second tether, worked the jam with a tool that looked more like jewelry than wrench, and muttered through the private channel. "You'll owe me a story for this." "Pick a long one," Jonah said, feeling his breath become his own again. Inside, when the suits peeled and the air kissed them with warmth, he tried to say thank you. And found that the phrase wasn't big enough. Lyra held out the jammed loop. "Rumor tied this," she said. "Rumor is more than paperwork. Rumor likes knives," he said. "And I like to know who sharpens them." Lyra did not walk to administration. She trotted, tail low, in thought. The office of Director Maizuru had the professional blandness of someone who believed flavors compromised objectivity. The lemon was so strong it bit her tongue. "Attaché veil," Aru said, standing a fraction too late, smile a fraction too rehearsed. "What a surprise. I have questions about maintenance reassignment for hull 1126, she said. "And about a tether jam that nearly made Helion smaller by 1 human." "I'm sure you're mistaken," Aru said gently. "Helion adheres to safety protocols. As a concept, or as a practice?" Lyra asked, tilting an ear. He blinked, slow. "We take every allegation seriously." "I have no allegation," she said. "I have a fact, a jammed reel that bears signs of anterior tampering. I also have a directive from my office requesting cooperation in a sovereignty audit of intersystem labor practices." She placed a slender crystal on his desk like a prayer and a threat. Aru's posture curdled an inch. "This is highly irregular." "So is a funeral," Lyra said. "I prefer irregularities that breathe." He tried 3 smiles in a row, chose the 4th, a pale thing that looked like Surrender's cousin. "We'll review the assignment pathways. See if anything anomalous crept in." "Good," Lyra said. "Because I prefer stapling solutions to stapling rumors." She left Lemon World and went back to the spine, where the air smelled like metal and problems. Jonah was waiting in the nook with a pile of parts that had clearly begun life together, and then divorced. "Found this in the recycler behind Diplomatic Concourse B," he said, nudging a delicate, petal-like array. "High-end multilingual translator. Someone told it a story it didn't like." Lyra knelt. The device wore the sovereignty's design language, curves that shy from straight lines, bioceramic filaments braided like vine nerve. "My people don't discard these," she said. "We cradle them until they die on their own terms." "It overheard something," Jonah said. "Either the words or the algorithm's conscience cracked." He spoke gently to machines. Not in superstition, in respect. He replaced a filament with a cannibalized conductor from a scrapped air handler, flashed and reflashed the kernel until the boot handshake remembered itself. When the translator woke, Lyra spoke in silver cant, a register Vulpine children learn for songs about ancestral rivers. The device hesitated, then rendered her words into standard. Not stiff, not literal, but carrying the cool of stone and the hush of water. She felt her ears rise, delighted. Most human repairs flatten us, she said. They don't hear the notes between notes. The notes between is where the truth hides, Jonah said softly, not looking at her, because sometimes you don't look at the thing you most respect, you listen. Your hands, she said, understand diplomacy better than mine. He laughed once. My hands just hate waste. The next week existed in 2 layers. On the top, Lyra was still an attaché, signifying in public, sipping at meetings designed to create minutes, not progress. Beneath, she became a courier for difficult truths. She ferried Jonah's drive modification paper not to engineering, who'd already decided innovation would arrive with the next fiscal year, but to procurement audits, where numbers and leaks share a mother tongue. The head auditor, a tall woman with cloud-white hair named Amina Isuf, read the draft in a silence that altered the gravity in the room. If this holds, she said finally, the fuel procurement anomalies in Quarter 9 make a new kind of sense. Someone's profiting from inefficient engines. Helion's budget loves inefficiency, Lyra said. It just learned to call it tradition. Amina's mouth went thin. If I move on this openly, it evaporates. If I move quietly, I need a test, proof the modification cuts waste across a standard run. Give us the run, Lyra said. We'll give you the proof. Amina tapped her slate. Transport corridor to Deimos. Freighter Kite's Edge. Officially routine. Unofficially watched. You have 2 days. Lyra left with the authorization, heart fast. She didn't love the word watched, but she loved what it promised. Rumor would slip, and the truth would step into the light wearing rumor's coat. Freighter bridges are churches to engineers. Nodes, rhythms, everything that breathes exposed and legible. Jonah stood over the lattice control with the small stillness of someone who knows where he is in the map of a moment. Helion's override tags are creative, he said, beginning the reconfiguration. It's like they booby-trap their own engine against competence. Lyra monitored the ambient field bleed, tail coiling in thought. We make competence tidy, she said. Your competence is untidy. That's why it works. He smiled without looking. That's the nicest thing anyone's said about me this month. They ran the corridor. The old drive thrummed like an animal that had forgiven its owner. Heat went from angry to conversational. The math Lyra had breathed with Jonah in the nook wrote itself across the fuel ledger like a confession. 8% waste down to 5, then 4.7, then 4.4 in settled state. On the return leg, the comms spiked with chatter, security signatures, admin pings. Amina's quiet run had not been quiet enough. When Kite's Edge docked, 3 uniformed officers waited, the polite kind, which is to say the dangerous kind. Inspection, their lead said. Routine. Jonah wiped his hands. Lyra folded her ears just so. Routine. The inspection found no contraband, because they weren't looking for contraband. They were looking for proof of audacity. Not finding that, they found paperwork misfiled and eyes too bright. They confiscated the drive logs. Amina Isuf outflanked them by a corridor of law and an armory of patience. She filed injunctions like scalpel cuts, bled the obstruction without killing the body. By morning, she held the logs again, and the numbers sang the song she'd suspected. The Sovereignty's orbital courier chimed Lyra's private channel. The Astral Court's message was a ribbon of quiet flame. Your 4-week shadow mission has become 6. The court is restless. Return for the convergence ritual. Or provide cause to delay. Lyra looked at Jonah through the clear pane of Helion morning. The station turned, the sun slid its tongue of gold along metal. She thought of alternate words for cause. The empress in her wanted to unmask, to bend Helion like wire until it made the right shapes. The Lyra she had become knew that shapes bent too fast to remember how they were bent, not why. She wrote back one line, cause forthcoming. Then she walked into administration with a new posture. Not empress. Not attaché. Witness. They called it a review session, because tribunal makes donors nervous. Director Aru presided, flanked by two neutral observers who looked at their own hands as if any alliance with the gaze might be cited later. Amina Isuf sat like a lighthouse at the edge of a reef. Lyra spoke first, voice low, the Vulpine purr shaved away to human clarity. She presented the numbers like steps across a river. She presented the tether jam like a stone with a name carved shallow. She presented a hypothesis, then a demonstration, then a request. Open a channel, she said, for talent to walk. From ducks to design. From rumor to record. From the spine to the bridge. Aru smiled thinly. We don't make policy here. Then make a door, Lyra said. Policy will find it. Jonah spoke next, stripped of metaphor. He talked about gaskets and coolant and prompt pages that assumed budgets, not bodies. He did not mention fear. He did not need to. When the observers looked up, Lyra saw something human she had learned to trust, the beginning of shame, and the possibility that followed it. Aru cleared his throat and said words he thought were his idea. We'll pilot a new program. Maintenance to engineering pipeline. Limited slots. Proper vetting. Amina's look said more. Lyra's said sooner. Rumor, in the walls, took notes. In the quiet after, with the spine humming its hymn, Jonah leaned in the nook and said, There's something about you. The way you tilt your head when numbers surprise you. I've seen it twice. Lyra felt her ears do the thing. She tried to stop them. Failed. You think I'm not an attaché. I think you're an attaché, he said. And also something that makes attaches nervous. She could have told him then. She said. From my office. Invitation to the Sovereignty's Institute of Applied Wonder. She let him hear the capital letters and then the smile behind them. Full scholarship. And a stipend for a sibling. I saw note of Aminari in your file. Chemistry at Dimos City College? Jonah blinked into a new shape of morning. He opened his mouth twice. The first time, no word came. The second time, he said, Why? Because a station that breathes deserves lungs that aspire, she said. Because machines aren't your only talent. Because your hands make music my people forgot. He looked at the cylinder like it might hatch. You don't mean a course. I mean a trajectory, Lyra said. He pressed his palms to the crate and quietly laughed. Not the laugh of a joke landing, the laugh of a door opening where there had been wall. The convergence ritual turned Variex's orbit into a festival of geometry. The astral court gathered in a hall that remembered rivers before the stars and stars before states. Lyra stood taller there. Not by choice, Aurelia Varen did not fit inside attaché heights. When the human delegation arrived, 7 scholars in gray, the hall inhaled. The sovereignty was ancient, its surprises had been few for a generation. Now a surprise walked on human feet. Jonah wore the Institute's simple coat. He walked as if gravity had made him an offer he respected but did not fear. He looked at the Empress and saw a creature with ears and eyes and a tail like burnished leaf, bioluminescent markings veiled beneath ceremonial cloth. He watched the way she inclined her head, not the degree, the decision, and said somewhere no one could hear, Lyra. Aurelia saw the recognition. She let him have it. He bowed in Vulpine court style, almost perfect, except for the fraction with which he made it his own. The court murmured because murmuring is what courts do when the future slots into place with an audible click. Senior fellow Aurelia said, her voice given full velvet. I would hear your ideas. As you wish, Radiance, he said. And then he told the court a story about engines that forgot they were hearts. After the tapestries and the speaking silver, after obligations dressed as toasts, they met in the Empress's private study, which smelled less of lemon and more of ink. "You recognized me," Aurelia said, arranging her tail across the seat the way tutors had shown her when she was smaller and the world seemed larger. "Not at first," Jonah said. "But I've been staring at problems until they blinked my whole life. Your head tilt wasn't a problem. It was an answer. That is either poetry," Aurelia said, "or evidence." "Both," he said, and did not apologize. She showed him a hololith of a structure growing between Earth and Varix. A ring like Helion, but built of windows as much as bones. "The Institute of Applied Wonder," she said. "We'll find talent on the edges and bring them to the center, then teach the center to go to the edges and listen." "You're offering me a place," he said. "A partnership," she said. "With Director Surev, Vulpine, obstinate in the useful way. You'll design the pipeline. You'll decide who gets first passage." Jonah looked as if he were measuring a room that did not yet exist but would. "On one condition." Aurelia's ears leaned in. "You would yoke the sovereignty?" "I would hitch it," he said gently. "We recruit from maintenance. From kitchens. From greenhouse aisles and tug pilots and janitors with patents scribbled in their heads. Not as a public relations garnish. As the meal." Aurelia felt her markings bright beneath her skin. "The condition is accepted," she said. "The meal is overdue." They came in colors and in silences, in nervous jokes and in questions that shook polite rooms. 500 beings from 28 species. A sarin algae farmer who could design sewage loops like symphonies. A human cook whose ratios for spice yielded predictive maintenance schedules. A Vulpine dockhand who could hear bearing fatigue as if the station had a throat that cleared softly twice a week. The Institute's atrium held a sculpture, not a flashlight, but a battered wrench rendered in sovereignty crystal, laying across an open book. Few knew the wrench had belonged to Jonah's father, a man who believed in bolts done right and days done honest. When Aurelia visited, she would pause by that sculpture the way a pilgrim pauses by a well, hand hovering, not touching, remembering thirst. Jonah learned how to run a place that did not yet know what it was. Surev taught him when to let chaos write its own grammar and when to edit with tenderness. Amina Isuf, now embedded as the Institute's ombud, taught them both how to smell the lemon behind polite objections. Helion spoke, that stubborn ring, began noticing its own secrets. The pipeline from spine to bridge opened. Not wide, not yet, but open is a shape you can widen with your hands. The Institute's first anniversary drew officials the way gravity draws tears. The speeches were careful. The promises were bolder than last year and smaller than next. Late, when the echoes filed themselves away, Aurelia and Jonah stood on a balcony where earth turned, blue and unsorry. The glass hummed with the song of pressurization done right. "Your sister?" Aurelia asked. "Mina," Jonah said, smiling into the dark. "Working on catalytic media for Martian greenhouses. She says the seeds trust her hands. You'd like her. She teaches with questions." "Good," Aurelia said. "The sovereignty has had too many answers." He glanced over. "They say the empress has taken a personal interest in human affairs." "Empresses are permitted interests," she said deadpan. "They also say," he went on, "that the director of wonder has forgotten he is supposed to be grateful and quiet." "Directors are permitted wonder," she said. "Quiet is optional." Their shoulders nearly touched. "Nearly matters." "Do you ever miss being Lyra Vale?" he asked. "Lyra doesn't miss," Aurelia said. "She looks forward. A beat. I do miss the way nobody stood up when I entered a room. It made it easier to hear what the room was saying. Rooms always say things," he said. "We're learning to listen. Together," she said, because the word wanted to exist out loud. Change wakes enemies whose beds are made of old rules. On a storm-yellow afternoon over Mars, the Institute's thermal hub reported anomalous draw. A cascade began to right itself, slow failure designed to look like error. Jonah read it like handwriting. Someone taught the system to lose. Aurelia's eyes thinned. Neutralize. Then invite the teacher to office hours. They traced the cascade to a young engineer whose career had been built under a director who profited from waste. She'd been promised a horizon that vanished when the Institute unspooled the map. In another story, she would be punished and made into an example, a cautionary silhouette hung on a gate. In this one, Jonah sat on a crate with her in the thermal hub's echo and said, "What did they give you that we didn't?" She cried the small, dry tears of someone too tired for the theatrical kind. A place. A reason. A myth about how the world works that made me feel like I knew where to stand. "Stand here," he said simply. "Help us design locks against the cascade you wrote. Name the locks after the things you were promised, so you won't forget which promises are dangerous." Aurelia watched through the glass. "You turned saboteurs into architects," she said later. "I turned stories," Jonah said. Hers wanted a better plot. The sovereignty is old, it loves ceremonies. The Institute kept one that wasn't on any formal calendar. On the day a maintenance to engineering cohort graduated, they held a small rite in the spine of Helion spoke, under a panel they never polished, beside a light that always flickered once before behaving. They gave each graduate a tool, not the same tool. The thing they reached for in their work when thought met matter. Wrench. Caliper. Code stick. Seed kit. Aurelia attended in a cloak simple enough to fool anyone who wanted to be fooled, and no one who didn't. Jonah gave the speech that wasn't a speech. It began, "I'm proud of your calluses," and went on from there. After, when the graduates dispersed to stations that needed them and labs that deserved them, Aurelia and Jonah walked the spine to the nook where a lamp still burned warm. "The lamp," he said, touching its smooth skin. "It still runs. It will for 50 years, she said. 50, he echoed, a measure and a promise. "What happens after that?" "We've built better lights," she said. "And better reasons to carry them." Helion's windows threw a late blue across the crate. Aurelia placed both hands flat on its scarred top. "When I took off the crown," she said, "I expected to lose power. I gained it. Not the kind with seals. The kind with names." Jonah nodded. "Power that knows who it's for. And who it isn't," she said. "There are rooms I won't rule anymore." "Good," he said, smiling. "Those rooms needed air." She turned, tail rising just enough to betray a mood her tutors would have scolded. "Jonah will you?" He lifted a hand. "Yes. You haven't heard the sentence." "I recognize the tilt of your head," he said. "It's the one you wear before you ask for help." "I was going to ask you to teach me to tilt it more often," she said, ears tipping to contrition and humor both. "I'll teach you," he said. "And you'll teach me how to hold silence without mistaking it for peace." They shook hands like engineers closing a circuit, and like friends agreeing to keep building the room they were standing in until it fit everyone who needed it. Years unfurled the way cables do when you've learned to coil them without twists. The Institute became less a place and more a verb. Helion spoke installed the Jonah flow adjustments as standard. Procurement reports stopped smelling like lemon and started smelling like copper, trace of honest work. On a shelf in the atrium, near the wrench and the book, a small plaque appeared. It didn't have names. It had a sentence. "We judge by what you make, not where you started." A child from Earth, hair in tight braids, eyes hungry, stood there on a field trip and read it out loud. "Is that true?" she asked the docent. "Today," the docent said, "it is true enough to stand on. Tomorrow, we make it truer." On Helion, a maintenance tech studying on break felt a warm light bloom brighter. On Varix, an empress adjusted a schedule so she could walk, again, the corridor where things still break first, because that corridor tells the truth in a dialect she refuses to forget. And in a nook that had stopped being secret and started being sacred, a lamp kept running, not because it was miraculous, but because someone designed it to sip the heat the world throws away, and because two people met and decided waste was a word they would spend the rest of their lives arguing with, until it became too small to hurt anyone. Orientation for Cohort 2 began with a hum louder than Helian's structural song. 500 new arrivals filled the Institute's great amphitheater, flight-suited tug pilots beside algae technicians, service droids with legal personhood tags beside bakers whose aprons carried the abstract art of flour and burn marks. Vulpine elders stood near human grandmothers who'd decided 60 wasn't late, just loud. Aurelia, cloaked simply, watched from the upper tier with Serev. Jonah walked the steps like a conductor who knows the orchestra hasn't met yet but is already playing. "We don't sort you by where you came from," he said into the open mics, "but by what you want to make next." The sentence calmed 1,000 unnamed anxieties. The calm lasted until lunch. A minor incident, just big enough to teach. A Vulpine student, Venin, winced when a human classmate clapped him on the shoulder in congratulations. The human, a Jovian tug pilot named Pilar Cade, thought the wince meant offense. She apologized too hard, loudly, and the apology grew arms and started waving. "I didn't mean to touch. Are we allowed? Do I need permission forms?" Venin's ears wilted. Pilar's hands tried to find pockets in a jumpsuit that didn't have any. The table went tense the way metal does before a crack forms. Aurelia arrived with a tray of tea and soft bread, the way aunties declare ceasefires. "We have different heat maps," she said, placing cups. "On Vulpine shoulders carry grief. Touch there is a condolence or a claim. You meant a cheer. Your hands and his shoulders don't share a dictionary." Pilar blinked. "So, where should the dictionary say good job?" Aurelia half smiled. "For Vulpine? Elbows and forearms. We greet with work." She offered her forearm. Pilar bumped it, then Venin did, and the entire table exhaled in laughter that knew it had almost been not laughter. Jonah added a new module to orientation, contact maps, a living atlas of gesture across species. Amina suggested a companion course, rumor anatomy, how misunderstanding puts on boots faster than truth can find its keys. The syllabus filled in an afternoon. Mars wore its thin sky like a scar that had learned to sing. Mina re-knelt between rows of dwarf pear tomatoes that glowed like lanterns. In the greenhouse the air was sweet with plant talk, the vents whispered, the condensers ticked. Her catalytic media, nicknamed Moss mined by a tired tech who'd been startled by how alive it looked, sat in shallow trays along the east wall, where sun hit water and arguments liked to start. The problem wasn't dramatic, which is how most important problems arrive. CO2 load spiked at shift change without corresponding O2 rebound. Fungal filaments took the opportunity to stage a velvet coup. If the balance didn't bend, harvest would, and after that people. Mina ran her fingers along the media. It was bioceramic seeded with engineered lichens and bacterial consortia that exchanged gases like old friends pick up conversations after years apart. Lately, the friends had stopped calling. She spoke softly to her team. "We're not going to nuke a symptom." She put a petri dish under a portable lens and magnified the negotiation, bacilli in a stalemate. "We teach them to talk again." The trick was rhythm. Human day on Mars didn't match plant day. Shift bells and meal steams made pulses the consortia couldn't parse. Mina wrote microtides into the greenhouse, fans breathing with slow lungs, light spectral bias shifting like a song modulating keys, irrigation that arrived as missed syllables rather than floods. For 3 days the numbers held their breath. On the 4th, O2 rose in a smile shape, CO2 dipped in a polite bow, and the fungus withdrew like a guest who'd realized the party had rules after all. The tomatoes blushed into their own names. Mina sent the data to the institute, tagged, language solved. Teach this grammar in hydroponics 101. Serev replied with a single star emoji that Jonah would later pretend he didn't see and then adopt shamelessly. Ancient empires collect opposition the way ships collect barnacles. In the sovereignty, the custodial circle polished its barnacle into ornament. Their leader, Counselor Kaulis Varn, wore tradition like armor and affection like a rumor. They were courteous and cutting, their phrases made of silk and glass. Kaulis requested audience and arrived with binders, always a tell. Majesty, he began, bow smooth as a blade being sheathed. Your initiative is radiant. And radiance, as we know, burns as well as warms. Aurelia inclined her head a degree that said, I hear the compliment. Continue to the clause after, but, Callist obliged. Opening our highest institutes to species whose cultures do not share our centuries of refinements invites dilution. There are processions that cannot be hurried. There are scents one does not mix. Aurelia allowed her ears to flick just enough to register the insult to human kitchens and Vulpine glyph scholarship alike. And yet, she said, the stew tastes better. You're here because you feel the heat. You fear you're losing your place at the fire. Callist smiled like a tutor correcting a child's grammar. We fear the fire will forget the recipe. Then write new ones with us, she said simply. Or step aside and watch us cook. The circle began a campaign dressed as concern. Anonymous essays circulated, on the perils of improper pace, the scent of decline. Their arguments were beautiful. Beauty doesn't make a lie less lie. Jonah, reading one such prose string at 2 in the morning, muttered, This prose has conditional clauses like tripwires. Amina sipped tea and said, Then stop walking into them. Build a bridge. Bridges need anchors. Amina proposed transparency so ruthless it would be mistaken for kindness. The Institute launched Glasswork, a public dashboard that made opaque processes shin-high and shinily obvious, admissions criteria, cohort demographics, project funding sources, post-graduation placements. No spin, no lemon. Raw numbers plated respectfully. They paired Glasswork with Echo, a channel where anyone, custodian, counselor, cook, could ask a question and receive not a statement but the data the statement would require, annotated with method and margin. Echo's first week nearly melted its servers with genuine curiosity and performative outrage in equal measure. A circle-aligned publication accused the Institute of data theater. Jonah went on a stream with a circle scholar and said, If a mirror is theater, the problem isn't the glass. The scholar blinked, then laughed, and then, on air, admitted the dashboard had corrected 2 of his own assumptions. The circle swept the admission under silk. But the audience heard it. Hearing is how rooms change hands. The Institute held its first festival of contact maps, a day that began as an apology for one lunchroom mistake and became an annual antidote. Kitchens from 28 species produced dishes that tasted like home and possibility. The main concourse became a river of tablecloths. A Vulpine spice table taught the human tongue how to read heat in 4 separate alphabets. Jovian tea masters poured gravity into cups. On a small stage, Aurelia, as Lyra again, because festivals are for masks that are truthful, taught ear etiquette for mammals, which mostly consisted of, don't assume. Ask. Listen. Adjust. Repeat. Her tail writhed like punctuation as she mimed faux pas and their repairs. Laughter made the lessons stickier than reprimand. Pilar Cade arm-wrestled Venom with elbows, because elbows had become the Institute's love language of choice. A Saran dancer in algae silk taught Earth kids to find balance on a floor that swayed to the music of pump harmonics. Under a shade sail, Jonah and Amina drafted the outline for a Commons Charter, 5 agreements about how to disagree. Section 1 said, We presume good faith and require good evidence. Section 2 said, We correct in public without humiliation. Section 3 said, We celebrate changed minds. The last 2 sections they left blank to fill each year, a deliberate promise to future arguments. On how Ion spoke, Kite's Edge reran the Deimos corridor with the readjustments singing. Jonah's hands had returned to the hull, not as punishment, but because he never wanted to lose the feel of the station's skin under boots. He noticed the meteor telemetry because it twitched wrong. Micrometeoroid forecasts are a boring art. This one tried to be in tier. Memo. Admin filed it under standard alerts and a second, hidden folder named Budget Impact. Delaying DocOps costs credits, and credits had learned to outvote physics. He walked the memo to Amina, who walked it to Lyra, who had no crown on Helion but wore an authority that rooms leaned toward. They didn't wait for forms. They called a spine assembly, a habit that had become custom, Anyone could speak, everyone could decide what they would do regardless of what administration thinks they should. Seal non-essential corridors. Pre-pressurize valve nests. Put slow-thaw sealant in the EVA staging huts, Jonah said, clicking through projections. If I'm wrong, we're late to lunch. If I'm right, we're on time to life. The assembly said yes in the sound a crowd makes when many throats agree, a low, grateful thunder. The swarm arrived sly, then loud. The first strike sounded like a giant shaking keys at a child, then like hail on a cathedral, then like a million pencils snapping in perfect sync. Helion vibrated with a frequency no instrument had wanted to measure. On deck 9 a window starred, then spidered. Slow-thaw sealant sighed into its purpose and held. On deck 14 a tether reel jammed in a way that felt familiar and unfriendly. The new design Jonah had installed, inspired by a jam that hadn't been an accident, caught the cut, rewound, locked. Power grids quivered as impact-induced eddies learned how to play with electricity. The lattice drive screamed and tried to cough itself into a safer mode. Someone needed to sing it a different song. Aurelia had come to Helion for the festival and stayed for the forecast. She stood in the central hub with a borrowed comms rig and the stillness of someone who'd give orders with her own spine if she had to. She watched the station flinch and decided that Lyra Vale would not be enough. She pulled the mask off her posture. Her voice went out on every channel. It carried bioluminescent cadence even in audio, the harmonics a Vulpar child hears in lullabies and a Vulpar soldier in rallying drums. This is Aurelia Varen, she said into 1,000 rooms. I am here. We will do this together. There was a beat of shocked silence, then a surge like current catching. Some bowed out of habit though no one could see. Most reached for tools. Director Ree, Aurelia said, no more pretending at titles that fit in smaller places. Sing the engine down. The lattice field had learned a panic loop. Panic loops kill brave things. Jonah and a team of 5, Venom among them, Pilar Cade glued to thruster management like a pianist, fell into a choreography that had taken a year to write and a lifetime to rehearse. Rebia's the outer quads, Jonah said. Give me a hair of the Deimos profile. Running it blended, Benin said, fingers dancing. The engine thinks we're smarter than we are. Convince it we are, Pilar said, touching thrusters like they were notes she could bend. The field stabilized, not into calm. Calm is a lie under hail, but into competence. Across the spine, oxygen gardens closed their ribs to protect leaf and hope. The Commons Charter Section 3 got its first public test. In the panic churn of the damage board, a new tech snapped at an elder for a slow confirmation. The elder finished calmly and then said, on open channel, I was wrong about your training. I am changing my mind. Thank you. The board, collectively, moved on, faster, cleaner. A shard punched through an outer corridor where 3 trainees ran patches like they practiced. The shard met a wall of foam that remembered itself at speed and turned knife to jelly. Amina Isuf coordinated triage with a spreadsheet and a voice that made numbers feel like hands. In the hub, Aurelia counted breaths. She did not speak when speech would add nothing. She spoke when the room needed a single, shared pace. Inhale, she said once, across all decks. Exhale. The station obeyed, and in obeying, remembered it was alive. The swarm thinned to spite and then to silence. Helion's outer skin looked older by a decade. Its inside felt younger by an era. The death tally read 0. The injury list read 14, minor to moderate. The damage report read like an epic that would become an operations training sim by morning. Director Maizuru resigned in a letter that smelled like lemon even through the feed. The custodial circle attempted a motion of censure for a sovereign who abandoned protocol and exposed herself to danger unbecoming the crown. The motion died in committee when footage of the helmsman's hands shaking as Aurelia's voice steadied them went mercilessly, magnificently viral. Helion named the retrofitted jamproof tether Lyra's catch in quiet defiance of propriety. The Empress pretended not to notice, failed smiling in private until her cheek muscles begged for mercy. Glasswork lit with a new pane, emergency measures and outcomes. Echo filled with heartfelt questions. How did you keep morale? What failed that we should fix next? Which practices were luck disguised as wisdom? The Institute answered in public, mistakes and all. The Circle submitted a tart paper on the dignity of distance. Amina annotated it, politely, with the number of seconds between Aurelia's announcement and the resumption of optimal compliance across decks. Distance lost the round. In the quiet shadow of Deck 12, where the spine's hum sounds like a cat pleased with itself, Aurelia and Jonah leaned against a bulkhead that bore fresh patchwork like medals. Their forearms met in the Institute's informal greeting. It felt less like elbows and more like history. "You did not have to reveal yourself," Jonah said, voice low. "I wanted to be obeyed for the right reasons," she said. "Fear is efficient. It is also dumb." "You chose trust," he said. "I chose the room," she corrected gently. "Trust is what rooms choose back." He looked at her, really looked, not at the Empress, not at Lyra, but at the person whose ears moved when equations surprised her. "The Institute needs to formalize what we did today. Spine assemblies as doctrine, not improvisation. A playbook that teaches leaders to hold the mic and then put it down." "Draft it," she said. "I'll sign it, and then follow it." He exhaled. It sounded like a laugh that had remembered its own sophistication. "There's a personal document I should draft as well," he said, ears human, cheeks unable to glow bioluminescent, so they flushed instead. "Boundary clauses. Rooms we're allowed to share. Rooms we should keep separate. I'm not asking for permission to step closer. I'm asking for a map so I don't break things I don't understand." Aurelia's tail flicked, answer and punctuation both. "Maps are my favorite love language," she said. "Bring yours. I'll bring mine. We'll plot a route that leaves the doors we built propped open behind us." Outside, Mars rolled its old red story under a new blue ambition. Inside, Helion's repairs ticked as patches cured. In the Institute's atrium, a child stared up at the wrench and the book and asked her teacher, "Who decided to put that together?" The teacher considered, then smiled. People who were tired of being told they could only carry one thing at a time. The girl nodded, solemn with the relief of being seen. "I will carry 2, she said. "Maybe 3. 4, the teacher said. "We have straps now. We share the weight." And far along the spine, in a nook whose ownership now belonged to the station itself, the lamp kept turning warm from waste the world had discarded, soft light for hands that weren't done yet. The Institute's first major patent dispute arrived disguised as success. A team of 5, Pilar Cade, Jovian, Venin, Vulpine, Hui Tran, Earthborn coder, Sala, Saren biochemist, and Mori, android with legal personhood, had invented a capacitance where that smooth power spikes on aging stations without costly grid overhauls. It worked so well 3 stations implemented the open prototype before the legal wraps were tied. Then came the argument no one wanted: who owns the weir? In old models, first author meant first everything. But nothing at the Institute was built by one pair of hands. Amina Isuf convened a commons panel, 3 elders, 3 peers, 1 outsider from a labor co-op, while Aurelia and Jonah listened but didn't steer. Sala spoke first, voice like ripples. "Without my enzyme coating, the polymer burns out." Venin tapped the diagram. "Without my heat map, you never know where to paint the enzyme." "Hui. The firmware's control loop is where the magic is." "It's mine." Mori. "The loop is emergent from constraints we set together." Pilar, shrugging. "I crashed 2 test rigs saving your firmware from my steering. My mistakes taught us what to avoid." "Do I own the negatives?" Amina wrote on the wall, "We built a we. The law prefers an I." They drafted the concentric rights framework. Circle 1, non-excludable credit. Everyone whose contribution is necessary to the core function is immortalized in the patent preamble. Circle 2, royalty shares proportional to the dependency graph, a technical map of which part fails if another is absent. Shares adjust across versions as dependencies shift. Circle 3, community tithe, 10%, into the Institute's open fund for tools and scholarships. Circle 4, negative knowledge stipend. A pool split among testers whose documented failures prevented catastrophic designs. The team nodded slowly, as if learning a chord. The co-op rep added, "And a clause for fork dignity. Derivatives must preserve Circle 1 credit even if royalties diverge." The panel voted yes. The stations that had pre-implemented the WIR signed on with unexpected relief. They wanted the thing. They also wanted the story that made owning it feel like belonging rather than extracting. Minari's Moss mind had saved tomatoes. Now it needed to scale to orbital farms where microgravity turned roots into philosophers and pumps into poets with stage fright. The Institute's horticulture bay drafted a demonstration for the orbital ring orbit circling Venus. Higher temperature, wilder light, nutrient loops prone to tantrums. Mina's insight: teach the media to dance. In orbit, flow isn't vertical, it's tempo. She built a lattice of flexible chambers that pulse nutrients with a rhythm matched to plant circadian signatures, not just day/night, but the subtle microbeats roots used to ask leaves for sugars and send back thanks. During install, a well-meaning engineer suggested, "Hard coding. The tempo." Mina smiled with all the kindness she could muster. "Hard code breaks soft things." She left the tempo. Negotiated, sensors nudge, microbes vote, the controller mediates. First trial, basil went from sulk to symphony in 48 hours, leaves fattier with oils that made the greenhouse smell like a kitchen promising good choices. Second, dwarf wheat learned to forgive a light hiccup without halting growth. Third, strawberries declared a holiday, then fruit set like confetti. Or it signed a multi-year agreement that included training locals, not just licensing tech. Mina insisted the contract read, "Teach, don't rent." The concentric rights framework handled royalties. The Commons Charter handled tone. On a video call, schoolkids in orbit held up a sign, "Thank you, Moss Mind people." The spacing was wrong, the message was perfect. Mina sent a crate of basil paste to Helion labeled emergency pasta sauce. Jonah pretended he rationed it. He did not. Counselor Callis Varn returned with sharper teeth concealed in silk. He launched a slate slick campaign. Guardians of Scent. Videos saturated with nostalgia, elders in soft focus reminiscing about apprenticeships that smelled of cedar and patience. The subtext wasn't slow equals pure. Fast equals rot. Outsiders equal noise. The custodial circle sponsored heritage grants that excluded cross-species teams under the pretense of cultural continuity. Applications asked for lineage where they should have asked for impact. A few Vulpine houses, sniffing status, aligned. Aurelia could have outlawed the grant with a signature. She didn't. "Ban a river," she told Serev. "And it finds a worse path. We'll braid it." Glasswork surfaced the grant's exclusionary clauses with highlighter-level clarity. Echo hosted roundtables where artisans from old houses admitted, awkwardly and bravely, that their best work started when a human apprentice asked the question no one in the room thought was permitted. Jonah published a long recipe, an essay that acknowledged slow craft while refusing to enshrine gatekeeping. Tradition is the memory of success and failure. If you edit out the failures, you confuse reverence with amnesia. The circle responded with a poll that showed support for measured pace. Amina responded with a better poll that asked, "Measured against what?" and included a time series of accident rates before and after spine assemblies became doctrine. Accidents had fallen. Confidence had risen. Measured pace, it turned out, liked evidence. Callous numbers plateaued. Silk chafes when worn too long. Sovereignty elections are stately storms. Candidates present sent theses. Manifestos encoded not just in words, but in volatile compositions that signal values to Vulpine noses and to anyone willing to learn. Aurelia's slate, the open hearth, smelled of cedar, citrus, iron, and rain on stone. Callous, amber of ancestors, smelled luxurious, some said stale. Debate night, the hall thrummed. Callous bowed with perfect angle. "Majesty," he said, "you gave us warmth. But fire without guard burns homes." Aurelia's ears angled. "And homes with too many guards become mausoleums." She gestured to the public benches where humans, Sarens, and others sat among Vulpine voters. Our hearth is big enough for more chairs. Callist unfurled his closing, an elegant parable about a forest that let in a foreign vine. It sounded wise until Amina, in the public commentary period, asked the obvious. Who planted the vine? Who benefits from the shade? Have you checked the species database to see if your foreign is actually co-evolved? Laughter broke where laughter feared to tread. The smell of ozone, that crisp tang that lives between thunder and lightning, seemed to hum above the hall. Votes tallied digital and sent. Open Hearth won by a margin that felt like relief rather than triumph. Aurelia's first post-election act was small and loud. She codified synthesis literacy into public schooling, cross-species optional. If we will use smell to vote, she said, half-joking, wholly serious, we will teach everyone to read. The Institute's field lab took a trip to Callisto Station, where gravity is a suggestion and storms on Jupiter write novels across the sky. The mission: retrofit an ancient ice mining grid with the capacitance weirs and test Moss mined in cold light hydroponics. The risk: the miners' union, scarred by broken promises from distant capitals, didn't trust visiting miracles. At the Union Hall, Jonah spoke plain. We're not here to replace you. We're here to reduce the number of funerals. A miner named Tomasz Evely, shoulders like bulkheads, folded his arms. You bring bright tools. Then you leave. We fight the old fights with new forms. Then we don't leave, Jonah said. We train your people first. You train us what we don't know. We sign a hold-fast clause. No decommissioning jobs for 2 years, natural attrition only, wage guarantees backed by sovereignty bond. Aurelia co-signed the bond on a channel the union trusted, not the official feed, but old Pam's bulletin, a miner-run stream with jokes brutal and fair. She appeared, ears forward, tail visible, crown nowhere, and said, If we fail you, you will have my scent and my signature to carry into court. Pam squinted into the camera. You talk like you expect to be held to account. I prefer it, Aurelia said. The grid retrofit went textbook until a corroded manifold on line C blew a gasket the size of a hand and threatened to turn a corridor into shrapnel confession. A trainee. Jessamine, 19, sleeves still creased from new uniform, remembered a Commons charter drill, through the shutoff, took a bruise that would purple like a galaxy and a compliment that would keep. The union voted to adopt the Institute's training as standard. Pam's headline. Bright tools, brighter contracts. Leadership fails in predictable ways, hoards credit, dodges blame, speaks first, hears last. Jonah and Aurelia drafted a ritual to make good behavior physical. They called it the forearm oath, echoing the Institute's greeting. In the main hall, leaders stood opposite their teams. Each leader bared a forearm. A team member painted 3 short lines with a pigment that smelled faintly of mint and iron: work, promise, rest. The leader covered the paint with their palm and spoke. I will not take from you what I would not give you: time, credit, air. I will name my mistakes on the record that counts. I will speak last when I can and first only when silence is danger. Then the team answered, forearms touching. We will tell you the truth before the rumor. We will carry weight you cannot, and we will say when our backs are breaking. It was more than theater. The pigment stained faintly for 3 days, just long enough to make reaching for a hasty decision a reminder. The oath spread. Helion took it, Callisto took it, Aurea took it. A station on the edge of Saturn's shadow recorded its captain reciting the lines before a tricky EVA, voice steady, breath counted. The EVA returned with everyone aboard. The captain's follow-up message. It wasn't magic. It was a checklist my bones could hear. Callis scoffed, called it populist perfume. Then his chief of staff quietly asked to license the ritual for their own org. Palace politics require leaders to remember they lead people. A storm the Institute didn't forecast arrived as a plagiarism claim. A private firm, Hyperdyne, accused Hui Tran of lifting control logic from a proprietary drive governor for the capacitance weirs firmware. They filed an injunction, splashy and mean. Hui looked like he'd swallowed a spanner. I wrote from scratch, he said. But my brain trained on papers Hyperdyne sponsored. Maybe I absorbed patterns. The Commons panel applied the concentric rights framework in reverse. Instead of splitting royalties, they split responsibility for originality. They pulled commit histories, interview notes, whiteboard photos. Mori reconstructed the code's evolution mathematically, showing how Hui's loop emerged from constraints unlike Hyperdyne's governor's incentive calculus. Amina argued a novel point: algorithmic convergent evolution. Different teams, same problem, similar shapes. The panel offered Hyperdyne a face-saving off-ramp, co-host a seminar on governor ethics, and receive circa 1 credit for the problem statement that drove the field. No royalties, but public prestige. Hyperdyne's lawyers grimaced. Their engineers, watching Mori's reconstruction, nodded with unbegrudging respect. They took the off-ramp. The seminar ended with a joint paper. When the math rhymes, separating theft from convergence. Hui exhaled so long his friends joked they'd file an air control ticket. On Helion, a change no one had ordered altered everything. The kitchen's standardized open prep. Recipes lived on walls with space for notes and names. Stolen with gratitude from. Tags bloomed. Night shift added spice hacks for day's shift. Saren's annotated, if Gil. K. Tilly Gantz pressed a ladle into her hand. Make. Don't watch. Aurelia stirred a pot of algae stew with garlic that would ruin courtly whispers for an hour. Do you fear losing your edge? She asked Tilly, nodding to the wall of recipes. Tilly snorted. Edges aren't lost. They're shared. If you don't sharpen other knives, you end up cutting everything by yourself. Jonah arrived late, lured by smell, forearms paint faded but visible. He and Aurelia ate with the elbow bumpers and plate swappers. A minor miracle of policy occurred. Respect became ordinary. Callist's latest essay, The Sanctity of Secret Sauces, landed like a relic in a room where secrets were now timed releases with credit and context. Even some of his donors grumbled. Their children had learned to cook at open tables and had no patience for vaults where recipes went to die. Boundaries matter more when affection is admitted. Aurelia and Jonah drafted a private room charter for themselves, 3 doors. Door 1 Work. Open by default. Anyone can enter. Decisions logged. Conflicts portable to the Commons panel if needed. Door 2 Strategy. Admits only those whose roles require it. Notes stored, replayable. No secrets that would shame in light. Door 3 Personal. Entered by invitation, exited before exhaustion. No decisions about public policy made here. If they slip, they repeat the decision in door 1 or 2 the next day clean. They kept the charter on a physical card in the nook. When one of them reached for a door out of order, the other tapped the card instead of tapping a wrist with admonition. It worked because it could be pointed to, not defended. One evening, door 3, they sat hip to hip, the lamp warm. There's a fear, Jonah said, that my closeness to you will make someone else's petition feel farther away. Aurelia's ears dipped. Then we will overcorrect, she said. More open hours. More door 1 walks through the spine together, ears and eyes making a map we can publish. They kissed once, a small vow that didn't try to outshine the lamp. Then they went to flip the sign on door 1 and scheduled a spine assembly about leaders' personal ties. They invited Callist. He came. He complimented the charter. He confessed nothing and learned more than he gave. That was enough. The Institute wrote its most unusual curriculum yet, fire drills for futures, simulations not of single emergencies, but of values under stress. One module forced teams to choose between speed and consensus with incomplete information and a countdown clock. Another asked a leader to admit they were wrong before a decision cost a life. Points were awarded for time to confession. Helion ran the drills station-wide. Callisto did them in 0G. Laughter at floating clipboards softened sharp lessons. Orid wrote a version for schoolkids that involved saving a greenhouse from imaginary mold using real coordination. Aurelia taught a class once a month. She opened with, I am not here as empress. I am here as student-in-chief. She failed a drill on purpose and narrated the failure out loud, the way climbers narrate grips on a public wall so the next climber knows where to place hands. The room applauded, not the failure, the narration. On the first anniversary of the swarm, Helion held a brief silence. Not pious, practical. Then they ran a drill named Lyra's Catch and a potluck named Open Hearth. The lamp in the nook was cleaned, gently, by a trainee who'd heard the origin story and wanted to be the kind of person who cleaned origins. In her private journal, Aurelia wrote one sentence that smelled faintly of cedar and iron. "We did not make a perfect world, we made better rooms." Under it, Jonah added Messier handwriting. "And we kept the doors open." It began with a distress ping from Outpost 17, a mining relay near the asteroid belt that served as little more than a fueling stop. A freighter named Silver Finch had slammed into its docking arm during a software glitch. The outpost's comm feed came through jagged. "Loss of pressure, 5 crew trapped." Then silence. Helion Spoke's emergency crews were busy repairing damage from a solar flare, and Sovereignty ships were days away. The first responders weren't a fleet, they were a class. Instructor Pilar Cade had been running a drill on EVA repair techniques when the distress call hit. Half her trainees were maintenance graduates barely 2 months out of certification. The other half were still nervous around thruster packs. Pilar looked at their pale faces and said simply, "We're the closest. Pack light. Bring everything." They flew a stripped-down transport from Helion, landing with a gentle bump on the outpost's outer hull. The docking arm was a crumpled spine. Atmosphere hissed through tiers and bulkheads. Inside, they moved like they had in the drills, pairs, checklists, and constant calm chatter. A graduate named Yara Ito used a new foam patch design from her capstone project to seal a corridor breach in under 40 seconds. Another trainee, Lars Oduya, rewired a damaged airlock by memory because he had sketched the schematic for fun on his bunk wall months earlier. The 5 trapped crew were freed after 9 tense hours. By the time Helion's official emergency team arrived, the class had stabilized the station, patched its main systems, and brewed tea for the exhausted miners. When reporters asked Pilar how she led rookies into a live disaster, she said, "They weren't rookies. They'd failed this drill 5 times last month. Today was the 6th run." Silver Finch's captain sent a message to the Institute. "You train heroes like mechanics. Don't stop." 6 months later, a diplomatic summit between Vulpine sovereignty and the Jovian Free States nearly fractured over a cultural misunderstanding so small it would have been laughable if not for the battleships in orbit. The Jovian envoy, Ambassador Felix Mero, placed his briefcase on the negotiation table at a Vulpine station, a sign of readiness and honesty in his culture. But among the Vulpine, placing personal belongings on ceremonial furniture was an insult. The hall's scent shifted to burnt cedar, offense. Before security could escalate, Mina Ree, attending remotely to present her orbital agriculture research, pulled up the contact maps interface she'd helped design after the lunchroom incident years ago. The holo displayed a 3D model of both species' gesture languages. "Pause," Mina said into the open mic. "Play this back in real time." The translation overlay showed Felix's movement in blue and Vulpine interpretation in red, a sharp clash between trust and disrespect. Mina toggled the intention markers she'd built into the software, showing the historical reasons each culture valued the gesture. Vulpine guards lowered their weapons first. Felix removed his briefcase, bowing deeply, and explained in detail the gesture's meaning from his people's history. In Jovian tradition, this is how you swear you're not carrying a hidden weapon. The Vulpine delegation, embarrassed by their reaction, offered a synthesis of rain on iron, apology. Negotiations continued. The Contact Maps app went viral overnight, downloaded not just by diplomats but by travelers and merchants. Aurelia signed an edict mandating Contact Maps integration into all sovereignty ports. "Let our stations speak all our languages before our tongues do." Mars's smaller moon, Phobos, was a place most saw only through telescopes, a rock haunted by mining scars and abandoned habitats. Mina saw a laboratory. Her Moss mine system had proven itself in controlled orbital farms, but she wanted to attempt something bigger, a partial atmospheric bubble. Instead of terraforming entire planets, a centuries-long dream, she proposed pockets of breathable zones stitched together like pearls in a necklace. She designed biodomes anchored to Phobos's regolith. Each dome pulsed with moss mined lungs, breathing air thick with plant vapor, scrubbed by microbes tuned to Martian soil chemistry. The first dome smelled faintly of basil and iron. A journalist who visited wrote, "It feels like walking into the future through a greenhouse door." The experiment caught attention from Earth governments and the Sovereignty Council alike. The custodial circle tried to stall funding, calling it reckless meddling with celestial heritage. Mina invited them to walk inside the dome. Careless Varn himself visited. He inhaled, ears stiff at the scent of photosynthesis. "It smells wrong," he said softly. "Wrong is just unfamiliar," Mina replied. "Give it time. Even your bones will learn to like this air." He stayed for 20 minutes. Later, he quietly signed a bill approving expansion funding. A wealthy tech firm, Lumidine, filed a lawsuit claiming the institute had, unfairly disadvantaged, their recruitment by popularizing the Commons Charter and fire drills. Their argument: transparency discouraged. High-value secrecy. The court battle dragged for 6 months, headlines screaming about sovereignty overreach. Jonah testified personally. "We're not discouraging secrecy, we're discouraging unaccountable secrecy. There's a difference, and it's survival." In a twist that made even Aurelia's most cynical advisors laugh, the jury sided with the institute. But Jonah countersued for damages, claiming the lawsuit had harmed scholarship growth. Lumidine settled for 60 million credits rather than risk a public relations disaster. Jonah donated the settlement to build the Glasswork Archive, a public library of engineering failures and fixes, freely accessible across sovereignty space. Its motto was carved into its entrance: "Mistakes are teachers if you let them speak." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Lumidine executives were invited to the archive's opening ceremony. They attended, awkward but respectful, and donated a collection of proprietary accident reports. Aurelia hadn't taken a vacation in decades. She decided to test what would happen if she spent 7 days without the crown, not just physically but politically. She stepped down temporarily, naming Serev as regent. She and Jonah boarded a research vessel with Mina and a handful of students, charting asteroid clusters near Saturn's rings. No formal entourage, no palace attendants. The sovereignty trembled for 3 days. Courtiers whispered of chaos, power vacuums, and Callists rumored ambition. But nothing broke. When Aurelia returned, the palace's scent was not fear but curiosity. People had seen that the empire didn't collapse when she stepped aside. Power, she realized, wasn't her presence, it was the infrastructure of trust they built. She decided to institutionalize, Crownless Week, annually, a tradition where the empress would vanish, and the government would run on its own protocols. The custodial circle protested. Helion celebrated with fireworks. The institute partnered with miners in the asteroid belt to create a mobile seed bank inside a heavily shielded freighter, the Ark of Ashes. It carried DNA samples, seedlings, and moss-mined spores from over 300 worlds. Miners became curators, guarding biodiversity like treasure. A former tug pilot, now seed custodian, said in an interview, "I used to haul ore. Now I haul hope." Aurelia made an unannounced visit, her tail swishing softly among racks of glowing germination pods. Jonah joined her, running a hand along a cryo-sealed wheat stalk. "Funny," he said. "I used to study by flashlight in a dirty corridor. Now I'm babysitting entire ecosystems." Aurelia smiled. "And I used to think power was measured in crowns. Now I think it's measured in seeds. Not every revolution is loud." A group of institute students began meeting weekly to audit the institute itself. They called themselves the Mirror Group. They published a report. Bias in recruitment patterns. It revealed subtle favoritism towards stations with better network infrastructure, unintentionally excluding candidates from outer colonies. Instead of silencing them, Aurelia and Jonah invited the group to present at a full assembly. They gave the Mirror Group a budget to fix the issues they'd found. 2 years later, the group evolved into the Office of Student Oversight, a permanent watchdog with rotating membership. "We built an empire," Jonah said at their first anniversary. "And then we built its conscience." Counselor Callis Varn wasn't done. He ran for regent under a platform of Heritage First, calling for stricter immigration controls on sovereignty hubs. His synthesis was heavy with amber and nostalgia, appealing to those tired of change. But Helion's voters remembered the swarm and Aurelia's voice. Callisto's miners remembered contracts that held. Phobos smelled like basil and hope. The younger generation wore paint from the forearm oath on their skin like jewelry. Callis lost by a wide margin. When asked for comment, he said simply, "I underestimated how quickly the future learns to vote." He retired quietly to a rural world. Mina sent him a plant cutting from Phobos. He sent back a thank you note. "It smells right now." A Helion maintenance graduate named Devinchin designed the Blue Corridor, a fail-safe evacuation system for stations. It wasn't flashy, just a combination of colored lighting, tactile floor strips, and AI-guided sound cues that led people to safety even in zero visibility. When a power outage hit a mining habitat near Neptune, the Blue Corridor saved hundreds. Journalists called Devin a genius. He deflected. "It's not genius. It's empathy in blueprint form." The Institute honored him with Circa 1 credit and a teaching fellowship. Devin insisted on keeping his maintenance badge. "I'll teach better if my hands stay dirty," he said. 10 years after the night Aurelia revealed herself during the swarm, she and Jonah stood on the same balcony. Helion glimmered, its scars healed but visible, a deliberate choice. Phobos's domes shimmered green in orbit. The Institute had grown into 5 campuses. Mina joined them, smelling faintly of tomato vines. "You realize," she said, "we've made history textbooks obsolete." Aurelia's ears flicked in amusement. "Good. Textbooks should expire faster than mistakes." Jonah leaned on the railing, watching a cargo ship trace a glowing arc. "Do you ever miss the maintenance deck?" Aurelia exhaled softly. "Every day. It taught me more about ruling than any throne." The three stood in silence, watching the galaxy's slow spin. Below them, in the old nook, the lamp still glowed, not because of ceremony, but because a janitor named Rhea had adopted it as her pet project. The sovereignty wasn't perfect. Power still whispered. But now the whispers had competition, rooms filled with people arguing openly, repairing openly, and building openly. Aurelia thought of her younger self, sneaking through Helion in disguise, and smiled. "This is what happens," she murmured, "when a flashlight meets a stubborn student." Jonah reached over, forearms touching. "And when an empress decides to listen."